as we know, guys, that parenting can be quite challenging. But at the same time, it is one of the most rewarding parts of a journey as a parent. And you might be navigating some rolling of eyes or shutdowns or actual power struggles. So we are just here to let you guys know that you are not alone. And this space, or the purpose of the workshop, was just to help support you guys so that you can have practical tools to navigate that, and as well as to give insight into communication and connection and conflict resolution. And today this evening, we've got our facilitators, Dr. Sam, Dr. Lungile, Fred, and as well as Nomfundo, who over the next 90 minutes will be taking us through exploring ways to create trust, reduce tension, and just build an understanding so you and your teen can not only thrive, but communicate in a great way. I think one of the topics that our speakers are going to touch on is actually around helping teens express themselves. So I'm sure you'll pick up a thing or two from there that you could use to help in future to just navigate those moods and like how to deal with them as well, to just better communication between you and your teen. And how old is your teen, if I may ask?
13.
13. Okay, cool. Seems like we've got the early teens here that are coming through.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Lungi, and I'm excited today for us to talk honestly about the ups and downs of parenting. As we've been hearing already, it is quite challenging. Just thinking about one of the scenarios that one of the moms said, that, hot the one time, cold the one time. So it must really feel like hugging a porcupine because, sometimes they shock, but sometimes everything's fine. But I hope we'll be able to give you tools that you'll be able to use and, just improve your relationship. So what is communication? I mean, we all know the dictionary meaning of communication, but have we ever thought about it, deeply, especially when it comes to talking with our loved ones? I think it's important to note that it is a two-way street, especially when we look at the parent-child relationship. Oftentimes we think, I'm the parent, I know what I'm talking about, so I'm going to just tell this child what to do and what not to do. But often we forget that we need to listen as well, because what the teen has to say also does matter, especially when trying to understand their point of view. We also have to remember that communication is not only about the content that comes out of our mouth, but it's both verbal and nonverbal. So our tone, our body language, and our eye contact make all the difference. Two people can say the same thing, but as soon as someone starts shouting at you or has this aggressive, confrontational body language, people often shut down and they no longer listen to what you're actually saying. And communication is more than just instructions. So why is this important? We see down here a little excerpt that I got from the Child Therapy Guide. It tells us that effective parent-child communication during adolescence builds trust, understanding, and respect. This kind of foundation allows adolescents to navigate the challenges of identity formation, peer pressure, and emotional turbulence with the safety net of parental support and guidance. We can go to the next slide. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So why is communication so hard? I'm sure often parents, they always wonder, why don't they talk to me? I put this picture here because I'm sure sometimes we think teenage brains are literally just made up of overreacting and anxiety and eye rolling, but that is not quite true. it feels like a maze sometimes. They shut down, they have these mood swings, and they always like to say, you won't understand, you won't understand. But this is very common because teens are at a very critical stage in their neurodevelopment. Their brains at this point are rewiring for independence. So they are in this transitional stage from child to adult. So this is a very critical stage in their lives where they're trying to figure out how to be independent and how to be an effective adult. So this doesn't mean, as much as they may push you away as the parent, like as if they have it all handled, they are still teenagers, they are still children, so they definitely still do need your guidance and they need your connection, because with good communication, then they feel that support and they can come to you with anything. We just need to change the way in which we approach them. So me and Mfundo are just going to do a little scenario. I want you guys to think about how we communicate to one another here. And you can put it in the chat or even raise your hands when we're done with the scenario. So we can just chat about what you think about the interaction. So I'll be the parent in the scenario, and then Mfundo will be a child. Do you have any idea what time it is? It's 1:30 in the morning. Your curfew was midnight. What were you thinking?
Ah, Mom, chill. It's fine. Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. I've been sitting here worried sick, imagining all sorts of things. You have no respect for me or the rules we set.
Oh, Mom, relax. I told you I was with Fred. We just lost track of time. That's it. What's the big deal? Everyone stays out late.
The big deal is that you lied to me. You disrespected our agreement. You're so irresponsible. That's it. You're grounded for a month. No phone, no friends, no nothing.
A month? You can't be serious. That's so unfair. You always overreact. I hate this house.
And don't think you're going anywhere. This is impossible. They just don't listen. So, except for maybe my subpar acting skills, what did you guys think of that scenario? You can put it in the chat, you can raise your hand, just some feedback. Because I'm sure this is not a foreign conversation. I've had this conversation with my mother, to be honest. So what do you guys think about it? And as a parent, or even from a teen's perspective, what do you think was right or wrong in that scenario? And if there's anything you
Dr.
would do
Lungi,
different?
I've got a response here on the chat. Typical teenage scenario.
That is very true. Like, as I said, I've also had one of these conversations with my mom. So that conversation, as much as the mom was very valid in her concerns, that is not the best way, rather, to approach the situation. So let's see why on the next slide. Oh, I also see here, Renee says the word hate is loosely used, makes me feel like my feelings aren't considered. That's very true. I think one mistake that we make when we communicate, especially in heightened emotions, is we use these extremes of language and we don't really acknowledge in the moment the significance or the weight of that word. And that sometimes it might actually have far-reaching consequences when you just probably said it in the heat of the moment because you were angry and not because you actually meant it. So as we see from both sides here, so from a teen's point of view, teens find it hard to communicate with their parents because of fear of judgment. Because already being a teenager is so tough. You are learning yourself. You are, now a big person in the world trying to navigate the world. So you're always worried, like, what will my parents think of my behavior and what I'm doing or my thoughts? They also don't want to feel misunderstood because that's very frustrating, especially when you don't know how to adequately communicate what it is you want to say or what you're feeling. They also have this desire for independence, and nagging or just giving them unsolicited advice feels very intrusive. But from a parent's perspective, which is very important as well, is the fear of losing control. You've raised this child all their life and you have been, probably like the one person that they look to, and they like what you say always matters. And now all of a sudden, um, the your child can just say, no, I actually don't agree, or no, I don't want to do that. Parents also worry for their safety, and especially in our day and age right now, you know, safety is a very, very big concern. Parents also might not understand teen stresses. And yes, we all say we've all been teens before, but I don't think we have been teens in the same context. And that really does matter because we have different stresses, different things that may negatively affect us. And parents are also busy, and it's nothing to feel guilty about. You have to go to work, you have long days. So when you get home, you are emotionally drained, and sometimes maybe it's difficult for you to properly express what it is you're feeling. You can go to the next slide. So what teens need, and I say need because it's very important. They might think, oh, I'll be fine without these things, but they do need these things, but they don't say it out loud, is to feel seen, to feel heard and respected. Even though they are teens, even though they are children of the house, they still want to feel like they are acknowledged, their presence and existence um, is acknowledged within the family or the household. They also need consistent support. They might push you away, or now they're independent, they do things by themselves, but they need to know that there's someone who is there should they need help, should they need guidance. And as I said here, space to grow. So that's also you allowing them to go and explore and be independent, learn and navigate the world. Not necessarily like you just leaving them to their own devices, but letting them go explore so that, they can find out who they are in the world, but also having the comfort to know that they can always come back to you as a parent for guidance and support should they ever stumble upon a challenge. So, what not to do as a parent? Please avoid when I was your age stories. They are valid and I understand them. And I'm sure we've all done this. And I know that these um, come from a place of love, but they do not allow effective communication. If you just jump in with advice without listening or even asking if they want advice with that certain situation, because sometimes they just want to vent and they want someone to listen. You also have to avoid oversharing or making it about yourself. This causes them to retreat, and because now it's all about you, they don't feel open enough to now tell you their opinions or what they think of the situation, because it almost feels like you've taken away that ability for them to sort of come up with their own problem solving, like you've just made it about you. Also, they do not like nagging, because as soon as you nag, they shut down. Whatever you say, it doesn't matter. They don't absorb it. They'll say yes so that you get your point across and the moment passes, but there's no real connection or communication there. And guilt tripping. Yes, in the moment you will feel strong emotions for whatever action that your teen might have made, but they've made it, and they've learned from it. So if you keep guilt tripping them and making it negative, then it just closes up any channel or any opportunity for them to be able to come to you and communicate to you even negative things. we can go to the next slide. So now we're going to do the same scenario, but I want to see if you guys see any difference or if you resonate with this one. Okay. Nomfundo, I'm really glad you're home. I've been very worried.
Hey, sorry, we just kind of lost track of time.
Lost track of time? Your curfew was at midnight. It's now 1:30 in the morning. That's an hour and a half past our agreed time. And I've been sitting here wondering where you were and if you were safe. When you're this late, it makes me feel very anxious and concerned.
Yeah, I guess we were just talking and then we stopped for food.
I hear you. You were talking and got food. Can you help me understand what prevented you from sending a quick text message or maybe calling, especially when you knew that you were running so late?
I guess I just wasn't thinking. My phone died earlier and I didn't charge it.
Okay, so your phone died. That's a practical problem. But it doesn't change the fact that I was worried. And we have an agreement. Our rules are there for your safety and because we trust each other. When that trust is broken, it makes it harder to grant that freedom next time.
So what's going to happen now?
Well, we need to address this. We agreed on a midnight curfew. When that's broken, there are consequences. And we also need to figure out how to prevent this from happening again. For tonight, we'll need to go straight to bed. Tomorrow morning, after we've both had some rest, we're going to sit down and talk about what happened, what the immediate consequences will be, and how we can work together to ensure you can communicate when you're going to be late. Or better yet, be home on time.
Okay.
And just to be clear, part of that discussion will involve your phone and how we ensure it's charged and accessible when you're out. My main concern is your safety and being able to reach you.
Got it, Mom. Good night.
Good night. I love you. So, with that scenario, how do you think what's the difference and what do you think made the conversation more productive? Okay, I see here that Funeka says the tone of the parent is cool, helps the child to cooperate. And yes, that's just it. Um, just like we said, that tone honestly matters. Tone and body language can speak 1,000 words. This shows that calm, empathetic communication, while still setting clear boundaries with the child. So we didn't just say, oh, it's fine, you can come late, that's all right. We spoke about setting clear boundaries, but it was collaborative because you do state that we both agreed on the curfew time, and it's problem solving that we work towards together. So, which means we have a more constructive outcome. So thank you so much, guys, for participating. I will now hand over to Nomfundo.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Lungile, for the amazing presentation. I guess we've heard it all about what not to do. I guess then the elephant in the room would be then what do we do as parents? How do we communicate better with our children, and what are some practical steps that we can take? Because the reality is we all want to connect with our children, right? The problem is, or some challenges that we may face is how do we connect with them in a way that we are able to, be able to listen to them and have them open up to us. Sinako, can you please go back to the previous slide? Thank you. Okay. So I guess one important aspect that, I'd like to start with is how do we get into a teenager's world? I guess that's one thing that as parents we struggle with is, how do I get into my child's world without, having to necessarily compromise my values as a parent, right? And also as a family. Also, we would like to, get into their world without compromising the rules that we have set in the house, right? I guess that's what we all, are struggling with. So the real question now would be then, what is it that we can do, and why is it important for us to get into, our children's world and to understand what exactly is happening, just to sort of climb into their world and see things from their perspective. So the first thing that we can do is just, when you are communicating with your children, you need to practice active listening. So active listening is the key to staying connected. So what really is, active listening? So when you communicate with your child, you listen more than you talk, because sometimes teenagers don't need your solutions. They just need you to listen and be present as a parent. So what are some practical steps that we can practice when we are actively communicating and actively listening to our children? Is to put our cell phones away. Most of the time, we're just, so consumed, and we're trying to distress from work, and we're communicating with our children over the phone. So it's important that we put our phones away and just be present, avoid interrupting them. I know it's so difficult being a parent. We always want to, sort of like fix our children's problems, but let them finish. Allow them the chance to finish before you jump in. Because like I said, sometimes they don't need our solutions. They just want us to listen. And then when you are communicating, it's very important, to make eye contact. I think Lungile touched on, nonverbal communication. That's the only way that you can actually be able as a parent to pick up on the deeper, meaning to what they are saying. You'll be able to pick up on feelings, a change in their facial expression. And then you don't only listen, we also need to, practice to reflect back, repeat what they're saying, so that just to let them know that you are listening. You also need to validate their emotions, right? So sorry guys. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. My team is present. Anyway, just to get back to what I was saying, we need to acknowledge and validate their emotions. Validating their emotions doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with, their perspective or their reaction to certain things. So, for example, your child is being bullied, for example, at school, and then they stand up for themselves and they get into a fight, right? Their feelings are valid at that moment, right? But fighting doesn't make it right. So as a parent, what you need to do is to acknowledge their feelings. How can you do this? I can see why how you would be upset, for example, and react that way, but still it doesn't make it okay. So what are we doing there? We are letting them know that their feelings are valid and you understand, but you do not agree with fighting. Fighting is wrong. And then you can also validate without, fixing their problems for them. Because as parents, we are fixers most of the time. We can't help it. We just want, to be there for our kids, right? And then one thing also that we can do is to ask better questions. I think at the beginning of the workshop, Sinako had asked how we connect with our children. I didn't hear most of it, but because my network was unstable. But I think I did hear parents say that, I do ask my child how was school, but it's just like I'm hitting against the wall. So here are some questions that, we can really ask to connect with our kids. So instead of asking them, how was school? Ask them, what made you laugh today? What was the worst part about your day? So this is not just like, school was fine. It allows your child to actually reflect back on their day, how it was. And so the conversation just doesn't end in yes, no, fine, cool. So we get to connect better with our children. And that is how we actually, you know, jump into their world. Snako, I think we can move into the next slide. Okay, I think we have established, you know, that connection is important, right? But on what basis do we connect with our children? Are we connecting through our own interest or theirs? Because, you know, the reality is sometimes our kids' interest can actually shock us, right? But it's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you cannot connect with them even though, you know, their interests are not aligned with your interest, as long as it doesn't, you know, compromise your values. So how can we have these connections? You do 5 to 10 minutes, you know, check-ins a day, find out how they are doing, and then you also respect independence and stay present. So how do we do this? We show respect to our kids. You know, sometimes your child can be, you know, expressing something and you can tell that they are really hurt by this thing, but sometimes they just don't want to talk about it. So you respect their privacy. Avoid, resist. I know it's so hard. I did say that, you know, as parents, we want to fix our children's problems, but resist from pressing them for, you know, more information, from pressing them and forcing them to talk. And then also respect. Also, respect isn't just, you know, resisting not to get them to talk about things. Respect can also be, you know, respecting their feelings and respecting their opinions. You don't necessarily have to agree with them, but you can just, you know, agree to disagree. And then when it comes to independence, it's more of a developmental thing. So their minds are developing and they are able to do certain things and they just want to be stretching out a few boundaries, right? So children desire, obviously, more control of their lives. And the more we keep questioning them, sometimes it feels a little bit intrusive, right? So our kids feel like now we're invading their privacy. That's the term that they use. So as difficult as it is, sometimes the only way that we can, you know, connect with our children is just to respect them and give them the space that, you know, that they need. And then another thing that you can do, you know, to connect with your child is to find shared interests. For example, in the morning, if you are the one dropping off your child to school, and most of the time during the drop-off rush hour, probably it's all about you. We're listening to your favorite music and we're listening to your favorite, you know, radio station. How about, you know, take turns? Like yesterday it was me. Let's listen to what you like. You know, what kind of music do they like? So in that way, you get to sort of, you know, have a glimpse of, you know, their world and what, you know, is happening, and you get to explore. So how you can connect is maybe during the time while they are playing their music, you may not understand it. You may not even understand why they like that kind of music. But obviously, it's just another way to connect. So maybe you can ask questions like, why do you like that music? What about the artist, you know, do you like? And then I think Lungile had mentioned this with the role play that we did. Stay calm even when they are not. As parents, we need to, timing is very important. Timing is very important when you are communicating with your child. It's very, very key, especially with teenagers. So avoid having important conversations when feelings and emotions are high. And I'm not saying this like when the child's feelings and emotions are high, but you also need to also have like an introspection, self-introspection. Avoid addressing important issues when your emotions are at a peak, when you're stressed and when you're frustrated, because then that leads to, you know, an even bigger conflict. So we must try by all means to, take note of the timing. How am I feeling as a parent at this particular time? Will what I am saying at this moment build or destroy? So let's avoid having, important conversations with our teenagers when everybody's feelings are high. And then another thing that we can do, most of the time, when this goes to any relationship that we may have, it may be your teen, it may be your partner. Most of the time, when you're feeling frustrated, we always like to point the finger at somebody else. You're always on your phone. You don't have enough time for me. But in order for us to communicate better, we need to replace you statements with I. It helps us communicate better. So instead of, for example, you're always on your phone, you can just reframe it. I miss spending time with you. Can we hang out? So that, because every time, well, once you say you, it automatically says to the person, I'm defending myself now. So that is why it does not end well. Sinako, may you please move to the next slide. Okay. Another practical strategy that we can, use for communicating better with our children is to be consistent and reliable. The world is unreliable, and the one place that you should feel safe is at home. So most of the time as parents, because of work or other commitments, we make promises to our children that we can't keep. That breaks the communication, especially with teenagers, because they want to be able to trust you. They want to know that you will show up for them. So when you promise you'll be there for the school game, be there for the school game. If you can't, please do communicate, and please communicate on time. And then be honest. The next one is be honest, but don't overshare. So sometimes when you're communicating with your child, it makes them feel genuine if you also share your own experiences. So the conversation is genuine. They know that, it's not only them going through that, you have gone through it yourself. But there's also a very thin line, It may be helpful, but try not to overshare and then take over the conversation and make it about you. And then, okay, I think we've already covered this. Avoid conversations when emotions are high. Watch your tone. Lungile stressed on, body language is the tone. So when it comes to communicating, be it with your child, with your partner, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So we must be very, very, the tone of your voice can mean something completely different from what you are actually saying. So we must always practice this. We must always be mindful of it when we are communicating. Show calm communication and emotional regulation. So, teenagers, just like any other person, learn better from what you do more than what you say. So we must demonstrate good communication skills, listen to our children so they listen to us, express feelings respectfully, and resolve conflict through communication. So our takeaway is be who you want them to become. So you demonstrate, they learn better by seeing what you do. Sinako, can we please move into the next slide? Okay, guys, we have a journaling and reflection slide here, but you can do this in your own time. I'm not sure if Sinako will be sharing the presentation. We would like you guys to do this in your own time, just to help with communication with your children. If you have, 10 minutes in a day to recharge and reconnect with your child, how would you use it? So these are, just takeaway questions that you can reflect on later with or without your child. and, you know, sort of make commitments on how you can improve your communication on, or what you commit to doing better this time. This week, for example, if sometimes you yell, so maybe the commitment that you can make for this week is to remain calm and use a calm tone when communicating with your child. I don't know if there are any questions. If there are any, we would take them right now.
Thanks, Nomfundo. For the sake of time, we'll take the questions at the end. I'll just encourage everybody to just ponder on these questions, but I will share them later on. And I'm just going to hand over to Dr. Sam and Fred.
Thank you, team. Thank you, Sisonke. Good evening. I can't see if I'm on camera. I wanted to come on camera just to say good evening to everybody, so you see who you're talking to, and I'm hoping that everybody's warm and really taking in the conversation that we're building for you, so we can all be better parents, right? But I am going to turn my camera off so that we can obviously be better connected from a bandwidth perspective. So with that said, I think, I saw the slide, the last slide that Nomfundo had, where it says perfect parenting isn't the goal, right? Present parenting is. And incidentally, when I was on my way home now from the office, there was a conversation on the radio around exactly what we're talking about, but they themed it conscious parenting. And it struck a chord for me because it just reminds us that we're all in the same boat. And I think from the comments that have been shared in the chat from everybody, it's very clear that we're all in the same boat. We're all going through the same experiences. And importantly, I think, I can't recall if it was Funeka or Kanyisa who said, "What am I doing wrong?" Right? And I figured the first thing I wanted to say is, you are not doing anything wrong. And I think it's very important for all of us to realize that none of us is doing something wrong, but there's a lot of unlearning that we need to do. And it's not by our doing, it's because of who we are, where we come from, how we were parented ourselves, that we find ourselves in, turmoil, because my word was turmoil in the chat. We're in turmoil. And because of the changes that are happening with our teens and all of that. Sisonke, if you could go to the first slide. So the first slide that we have, while Sisonke is bringing it up, is we wanted to just pause and remind ourselves of all the challenges that all of us as parents and our children are actually facing, right? Because the reality is we are living in different times and everybody's going through something different. But the biggest of them all, really, the challenges that affect how we parent and the relationship with our children, is really around technology and screen time. I mean, all of our teenagers are living in a time where technology, innovation, TV, cell phones, all of that are a big part of our lives, even us as parents. And I think Nomfundo touched on it to say we spend so much time on our machines or our laptops or our phones, and that's only because of the times that we're living in. And most of the worries that we think about because of our children is the digital addiction, right? Because of the technology or the screen time that we all have as parents. We're concerned about that. Coupled with that is work-life balance, right? And I want us to think about all of these things with empathy. I learned a valuable lesson a long time ago as I was going through, therapy and counseling and all of that, and actually having a business coach as well. And I said, we need to think about empathy, or rather the simple explanation of empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes and saying, I feel with you. Because sympathy is, or the difference between empathy and sympathy is that sympathy is, I feel for you, which means you're removing yourself from the situation and you're looking at it from the outside. But empathy is really just being in there. And we've got to treat ourselves with empathy, and we've got to treat our children with empathy, and they also have to treat us with empathy, because when you put yourself in their shoes, you begin to understand, or you have a little bit of understanding of what they're going through. And work-life balance is a big one. if you're running a business, if you have a job, if you are doing something to earn a living, or various responsibilities that affect how you parent, it's very important to recognize that. In fact, Nazreen, I think, touched on it when she commented to say their day starts at 5 a.m. in the morning, and there's so much going on in the day, right? And the key for that is, by the end of the day, everybody is exhausted. And I think she also spoke about it. Everybody's exhausted, and exhaustion is one of the key things that actually creates a bridge between us, because when you're exhausted, your response to different things is different. You're not calm. In fact, one of the comments in the chat was that your BP rises, or remaining calm when you're worried and BP is high, it's impossible. That is absolutely true. I think that was Renee. That is so true. When you're exhausted or when you're worried, your BP is high, it's difficult to remain calm. And I don't think any of us are saying to you now, these are the solutions we're giving you today and they're going to work tomorrow. But we're trying to say it is a journey of practice. It takes time. But when you have an awareness, which is what I spoke to you about on learning, when we are aware, we start to act and believe or behave differently. Right. So work-life balance for me, for all of us, is a big one. Next slide, please, Sinako. So on the next slide, we start to talk about social media influence, which is actually part of the first slide, which spoke about technology and screen time. And social media influence then just plays a big role in how our children see themselves, how they see us, and even how we see ourselves. But the pressure for me, or rather the pressure that influences children, is also a big part. And if you think about adolescents, and we refer to them as teenage, and I know as growing up, the word adolescence had a negative connotation to it. But the reality is, between the ages of 11 and 13, or until about 17 and 21, we are all still going through adolescence. And really, adolescence just means that you're finding yourself. It's a transition between being a child and getting to adulthood. And that transition is so important, because that's when you're trying to figure out, who am I? And really, our children at that age are trying to figure out, who am I? And that is why also, I think it was Funeka, or somebody mentioned that, who said, 1 minute they're sweet, then they have mood swings. 1 minute they agree, they do the one thing that you want them to do, then they don't. But it's really the influence of who they're trying to become and finding themselves. And that's where empathy needs to come in, to think about, when you were a teenager as well, you went through the same thing. And yes, I think Lungile spoke to it, to say we've got to avoid saying, when I was a teenager. And again, I repeat, there's a lot of unlearning of how we were raised, or what we went through, the traumas that we've experienced, that really inform the kind of parents we are. And there's nothing wrong with that, except if we are not aware of it and actually taking responsibility to say, how am I going to approach this differently, which is what Olungile and Nomfundo were speaking to. But also remembering that our children actually are dealing with so much, and social media is a big impact of our lifestyle. If you think about most of us when we were growing up or being raised, we didn't have the internet or social media. And it's not to say we didn't go through the same thing. Our challenges at that time were different to what they're going through. And then a big one is financial stress. When you're a parent and you're thinking about money, or paying school fees, or extramural activities with these fancy schools that everybody takes our children to now, the demands that come with that, and also the rising costs and economic pressures, really they can put pressure on us. And I think when we pause to consider all of those things, when you are engaging with your child, it's very important to remember that honestly, there's so many things that influence you as a parent. And I'd love for our children to also remember that, to take that into consideration, while they also consider the many things that, create the challenges in their life. And then emotional and psychological stress, and I think, again, that's a big one. We know that mental health and mental wellness are concepts that have only come to be important in recent times. Before, our parents didn't know that, or didn't even have time to consider those things, because they were dealing with other issues. And the concept of emotional and psychological stress is so prevalent now, and it influences how we engage with our children. And so I want you to keep the conversation that has happened prior with Ulungile and Nomfundo in mind, to say, all of those things that we are in the habit of doing, comparing ourselves when I was your age, it is again a result of how we were raised. And it is a result of the many things that you as a parent are dealing with. And again, remind yourself, empathy, be empathetic to yourself and also be empathetic to your children. So navigating these emotional demands as a parent is really challenging. Next slide, please, Sinaka. So, and then part of the technological advances that we're in and our children having access to all of this, what they also need to realize is that you as a parent, when you're thinking about your child and trying to connect with them and trying to talk to them and, you know, wanting them to get off social media and all of that, we're worried about cyber safety, right? Because we know about bullying, cyberbullying. We know about all of the negative things that happen on social media that our children are exposed to, and couple that with them trying to find themselves and trying to develop a personality, which is a big thing as well. It's those things that actually just influence how we engage with them. But being aware of these things is quite critical. And then I've just briefly spoken about mental health. And, you know, as parents, we've got to be kind to ourselves. We've got to take a minute and think about all of these things. In fact, one of the key things that we're talking about, and Dr. Sam will go into that when she talks about some of the strategies of how you can, you know, take care of yourself and approach the situations, is that, you know, when you get home and you've got children running around and needing your attention, or someone lost a school bag or someone lost something, and you're shouting at them out of frustration, of course, remembering the fact that there's financial means that you need to think about buying an expensive thing that is needed at school, and now the child has gone off to, you know, to lose it. But also remembering that they didn't lose it because they wanted to. It really is a mistake. The difference is in the approach, which is what Dr. Lungile was talking about as well, in the approach of how do you deal with your child and how do you, you know, engage them. So mental health for us, you know, taking care of yourself is quite critical. It's like they always say, if you've had the privilege of being in a plane, you're always reminded, even when the plane goes off, and as parents, you're going to rush to put the mask on your child first. But in fact, you've got to put the mask on you first before you can help your child. Because by the time you're done, you know, putting the mask on your child, you're most likely not going to be able to put the mask on you. So it's just, so mental health for me, I think it's the same thing to say, you've got to take care of your mental health first, you know, and that means caring for yourself, being kind, recognizing that you're exhausted, you're going too much. Waking up at 5 o'clock and caring for 3 adolescent children is too much of an ask. Right? Yes, we have to do it. You can do it, but it is too much of an ask. And then the societal expectations, right? We live in a society where this pressure of looking a certain way, of having certain resources for the children, because that's how they get to engage in school, you know. But you as a parent as well, you want to afford these things for your children. You want to give them a better life. You want them to have access. But the reality is, with all of the other issues we're dealing with, it is difficult. Then sleep deprivation. The biggest thing that we also underestimate is taking time to sleep. You know, I mean, we're told that you need to sleep for 8 hours minimum, because that's when your body reconnects. That's when you relax. That's when you shut down. But when you do not have enough sleep, your reaction to different things becomes, you know, different. The way you talk to people, I know, I always say to people, at the very least, if I don't have 6 hours of sleep, and that's cutting it thin, I know my mood is impacted, which means in the home, I'm not going to be my best, right? Because my body's not rested, my brain is not rested, my emotions are all over the show because I'm still recovering from the day before. So these things, even though we may think they're silly, they're big things that influence how we parent. They're challenges that influence how we show up with our children. And it's very important to recognize those things and be aware of them. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now, on the next slide, we start to think about you know, rethinking conflict and discipline. And we put it here because we thought, with all of the strategies that Dr. Lungile and Namfuda have spoken to, and then the challenges that we face as parents, which just really talk about being empathetic to ourselves. The conflict that we have, and we've all spoken about it, about how they respond, body language, the tone. And I put a quote there that came from American psychology team that says, when we fight to be right, we lose the relationship. When we fight for understanding, we build trust, which is actually what Nomfundo also alluded to, because in the way we speak to our children, how we engage them, how we build that relationship, and even the scenario that they acted, really the essence of it was to demonstrate that we've got to just speak to our children, right? But also, we have to discipline them. We cannot live in a society where there's no discipline. I suppose here the action also is, what does discipline look like? But really, at the heart of discipline, it really is a proactive way of teaching and guiding. That's what we all want as parents. But it also focuses on, what do I expect from you? Right? It's not just about punishing when something's gone wrong. It's really just talking to our children, setting those clear boundaries to say, I've asked you to, please can you make your room? If you do not make your room by 2 o'clock, I will be taking away your cell phone. Right? That is discipline. It's just not done in the old way, where some of us were spanked, as children. And psychologists have also said that, there are some negative side effects, or negative effects of spanking children, of beating our children up, that actually end up giving us people in society who may be prone to being perpetrators of GBV or that sort of thing. So we need to start thinking about positive discipline. Right. And again, I know when emotions are right, it's difficult, but the strategies that Nomfundo spoke to as well of just pause and breathe and just walk away and we will talk about this when I'm calmer. So you can go and actually just speak to yourself as a parent and calm down. So positive discipline, and I've just spoken to this, sets clear expectations. You use logical consequences, because, punishment, which is what we are accustomed to as growing up in a different era, is really about consequences, but it's about, what do the consequences look like? And positive discipline also helps us build long-term self-regulation and cooperation, because once we know as children what is expected of me, or what is going to happen if I do this, I might, the intention is for me to start acting differently. If you may please go to the next slide. So in all of that, effective discipline then, looks, as I said earlier, is really about understanding the emotions and the behavior behind the emotions, right? What do I need to do? And why did we get here? It's also having that conversation, which I think Nomfundo alluded to understand why are we here. But really, it's also about teaching skills for self-control and respectful communication. If they know that I'm communicating with them like a person who's real, who's on the journey of building maturity, because we also don't want to impose maturity on them, because we will not be empathetic. Understanding that they're still on the journey, we're able to speak to them differently. And I think, again, Nomfundo spoke to this too. Model. Kids learn by modeling, and sometimes they don't, that's true. But I think if we practice a certain behavior a lot more times, we're most likely to see our children also following in that footstep. But also, that's notwithstanding the influences that they have outside of the home, right? Negative behavior that they get accustomed to in school or in other settings, which also influences who they become. But using stuff like timeouts and calm down, not just a punishment, can also just help us in getting them to think differently, or even respond differently. And I've also mentioned this to say, removing privileges, with clear steps to earn them back, right? So I'm taking a phone because you did not make your room at the time that I asked you to. Now, for the next day or two, you are not going to get this phone back until I see you making your room at the agreed time, right? We start to see, or we hopefully will start to see, a behavioral change, or an understanding that I'm respected, and I also need to show respect in the home. Please, if we can go to the next slide. So, and then when we progress into understanding discipline, and then now we want to talk about punishment, right? So, as I said earlier, children do learn through consequences, although we don't want to get to the consequences, especially if you have not communicated them in advance, right? Because you can't communicate spanking. Yes, you can say, I'm going to spank you if you do this. That's a threat, and you're already imposing, fear. And again, children will grow with that fear. I mean, somebody was saying earlier on the radio when they're talking about this conversation, to say some of us grew up in an era of aggressive discipline, right? Where you were disciplined in schools, we used to have corporal punishment and all of those things. Now those things are not there. And sometimes saying to a child, go to the corner, which is what, the Western society is often accustomed to. But there's madness, there's method in the madness, right? In saying to somebody, go to the corner, it is confined. It is actually teaching them to say, again, as I said earlier, if you do this, there is a consequence. But if you do this right, then we're good. We're going to have a great time. But now when we look at punishment, right? Punishment really is a reaction to misbehavior, which is really designed to stop the action, right? It often causes short-term compliance, but doesn't teach long-term. And what we mean is when you threaten somebody with punishment, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to spank you, in the moment, I'm going to stop the behavior, but it doesn't teach me long term, right? If anything, it's going to teach me to rebel. It's going to teach me as I grow through the stages of adolescence. Remember, adolescence is really a stage of finding myself. So, whatever you tell me in this moment, particularly if you're going to punish me, I'm going to go against it, no matter what you think, no matter what you do. And we can all attest to this because we've all been teenagers. We've gone through this experience where parents threatened us with beating us or spanking us and whatever. And today you don't do it, tomorrow you do it, right? And in the same breath, even in conversation, as we're trying to move towards a stage of being collaborative, negotiating, and talking to our children, doesn't mean it's going to go away. But it's a journey of teaching and getting us to start thinking differently. I've already alluded to the effects of this type of punishment and what they do to children and all of us, right? Which we all need to be cognizant of. Please, will you proceed to the next slide? So, what does positive punishment look like? So positive punishment really is, as I said earlier, taking away something because you've done something. So it's more of a consequence management, right? It's again discipline, but it's in a positive way. It's still punishment, but it's not harsh, it's not aggressive, it's not trying to inflict pain. Because the question always remains, how do you show love by inflicting pain? Right? And then we get surprised when we see society changing and people are becoming different because of the type of discipline they received. And I'm not saying this applies to everybody, but I'm saying it is some of the influence and contributions of of how people were raised that they become who they become today. So effective discipline alternatives really, as I've said, loss of privileges, right? You're not going to go out with your friends this weekend because you didn't do what was asked. But again, we do it in a way where we're having a conversation, where we're sitting down and having a conversation, where we're being heard, where you're being seen, right? So we don't want to be in a situation where there's negative reinforcement, where we encourage behaviors that are terrible. So it's just keeping that in mind and making sure that we just keep having conversations with our children. And I'm, in the interest of time, I'm going to pause there and hand over to Dr. Sam, who's going to continue the conversation. Just look at how do we navigate conflict. Over to you, Dr. Sam.
Thank you, Fred. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Sam. I'm just going to get into it. I think we have 9 minutes, and in the 9 minutes, we need to wrap up and summarize. So, how do we navigate conflict? I think one great thing we need to be aware as we are parenting our children is realizing that you are parenting an individual who does exist within a community, but you are not raising the whole community's children. So, which means there's going to be discrepancies in each home, which are different. And we as parents need to be aware that our children talk to one another and they'll come and tell you, but Sipo's mom does this. But you need to really understand your unique child, your home, and whatever it is that you as a family are deciding. So this is a very amazing quote that Fred shared on this presentation. Even when we disagree, we are still family. We are not fighting each other. We are fighting for understanding. So when we are navigating conflict, particularly as parents, because we are supposed to have more emotional awareness and intelligence, we need to realize that we are not fighting against our children, but we are fighting to reach common ground, to understand them, so that we help them navigate this world. So, what doesn't work? So, really, when children get to adolescence and teenage years, spanking, yelling may stop the behavior, as Fred has said, but temporarily. But this is also linked to a long-term harm, because now they've become somewhat adults with opinion, and they're also influenced by the world. So spanking, yelling doesn't necessarily really help them in the long term and give them probably a mindset or perception of taking responsibility and knowing consequence when they've done wrong. So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends avoiding corporal punishment. And this really, I think, is open for a debate. I think we can comment about it and just share thoughts as we go along. Another important thing when we're managing conflict is to really stay calm. As hard as that can be, it's a point for us as parents to really take a step back. Fred said it so nicely earlier, saying, take a step back, really reason out as a parent before trying to have a conversation with your child about what has happened. And also just encourage our children to use statements that where they say, I feel, and it's not really always about us, or I see you do this. And also really put them on the journey of their life and show them that we are accompanying them as they make decisions for their behaviors and really walk through the consequences of their behaviors. We've said this before, use time out wisely, remove your child from the situation, and not just punish the child. And also, one thing I think we also forget in the midst of disciplining or handling conflict, we really forget sometimes to praise them for the positive behavior, which is really a good reinforcement of the actions we want to see as parents and actions which will benefit them in the long run. So pick the right time to have important talks when everyone is calm, and really, just like how we saw Dr. Lungile Nomfundo demonstrated in the practicality of the event. So the practical techniques for healthy communication is to always co-create solutions with your child. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, ask how we can handle things differently next time. Aim for a middle ground that works for everyone. We saw this well displayed when Lungile and Nomfundo were showing us the difference between the two scenarios. And one important thing when it comes to parenting is that we sometimes shy away from admitting when we do wrong. So we need to learn to admit when we are doing wrong, take responsibility, because we are modeling out behaviors as well. So if we don't take responsibility for doing wrong, we are teaching them that they shouldn't take responsibility as well. So this also shows the level of maturity. It builds trust between parent and child and ensures that the conflict is really resolved in a peaceful way, in a way that we still remember that we're building one another up. It makes it easier also for the teens and the parents to give each other grace next time anyone might fall short of what we had promised or agreed between one another. So when talking is hard, write it down. So a note, a text, a voice note can help express feelings, whether from the parent or from the teenager, when it's really hard to speak because emotions are high and we're still a bit angry. And also, writing often makes things easier and to be more honest and clear in our communication. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all the speakers today. Wow, wow, wow. You guys shared quite a lot. And I think I want to just open up the floor to the parents, just to like raise any questions, or if you'd like to share. I know we do have 3 minutes remaining of the scheduled time, and we do apologize for going over, but I think we would be doing a disservice to the session if I don't allow you guys to just share your experiences or ask any questions relating to the content or relating to experience, and maybe we can add 10 minutes and we can just close at 8:10 if you guys are comfortable. Okay, you can either unmute yourself for questions or comments, or you can type in the chat. Happy to take any of the questions or comments. Okay, I see Renee speaking about working on our relationships and practicing being more calm. 100% agree. I think what I think it was Dr. Sam or Fred spoke about putting that example of being on the plane, and you need to put on the mask yourself before you can assist your child or a passenger, which is taking care of yourself, you know. So when you are self-aware and manage your emotions and work on yourself, it will be quite easy. It will get easier for you to get into that moment where you remember to be calm when you're having conversations with your team. And we post on our social media pages, which is Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. So you guys are more than welcome to follow us to see when we do have and then also to help us continue the work that we do. I will just share our banking details on the chat, and if you'd like to make a donation to our NGO, we would greatly appreciate that. And in closing, I'd just like to thank the speakers once again, and the parents for joining. I think the key themes that we had this evening was just listen more than we talk, especially when we are communicating with our teens, just to be more empathetic and realizing that our children are not us, and just respecting their independence and understanding them as an individual. But at the same time, knowing also who you are as a parent, and being present instead of trying to be a perfect parent. And I think particularly what stood out for me was the proactive approach to discipline and punishment, which I think was really great. And we will be sharing the recording, as I mentioned earlier. And I will also share the slides so that if you want to go through the recording and the slides, you'll be more than welcome to go through that and also share with your partner. And if you've got any further questions, maybe as you are going to sleep this evening, you're like, actually, I forgot to ask about this. I'm going to pop an email address here in the chat, and you can just send us an email, or you can DM us on the socials.